Section 2 of Father Sergius. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by James Carson. Father Sergius by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise and Aylmer Maud. Chapter 4. Father Sergius lived as a recluse for another 7 years. At first he accepted much of what people brought him: tea, sugar, white bread, milk, clothing, and firewood. But as time went on he led a more and more austere life, refusing everything superfluous, and finally he accepted nothing but rye bread once a week. Everything else that was brought to him he gave to the poor who came to him. He spent his entire time in his cell, in prayer or in conversation with callers, who became more and more numerous as time went on. Only 3 times a year did he go to church, and when necessary he went out to fetch water and wood. The episode with Makovkina had occurred after 5 years of his hermit life. That occurrence soon became generally known: her nocturnal visit, the change she underwent, and her entry into a convent. From that time Father Sergius's fame increased. More and more visitors came to see him, other monks settled down near his cell, and a church was erected there and also a hostelry. His fame, as usual exaggerating his feats, spread ever more and more widely. People began to come to him from a distance, and began bringing invalids to him whom they declared he cured. His first cure occurred in the 8th year of his life as a hermit. It was the healing of a 14-year-old boy, whose mother brought him to Father Sergius, insisting that he should lay his hands on the child's head. It had never occurred to Father Sergius that he could cure the sick. He would have regarded such a thought as a great sin of pride, but the mother who brought the boy implored him insistently, falling at his feet and saying, "Why do you, who heal others, refuse to help my son?" She besought him in Christ's name. When Father Sergius assured her that only God could heal the sick, she replied that she only wanted him to lay his hands on the boy and pray for him. Father Sergius refused and returned to his cell. But next day, it was in autumn and the nights were already cold, on going out for water he saw the same mother with her son, a pale boy of 14, and was met by the same petition. He remembered the parable of the unjust judge, and though he had previously felt sure that he ought to refuse, he now began to hesitate, and, having hesitated, took to prayer and prayed until a decision formed itself in his soul. This decision was, that he ought to accede to the woman's request, and that her faith might save her son. As for himself, he would in this case be but an insignificant instrument chosen by God. And going out to the mother, he did what she asked, laid his hand on the boy's head, and prayed. The mother left with her son, and a month later the boy recovered, and the fame of the holy healing power of the starets Sergius, as they now called him, spread throughout the whole district. After that, not a week passed without sick people coming, riding or on foot, to Father Sergius. And having acceded to one petition, he could not refuse others, and he laid his hands on many and prayed. Many recovered, and his fame spread more and more. So 7 years passed in the monastery, and 13 in his hermit's cell. He now had the appearance of an old man. His beard was long and grey, but his hair, though thin, was still black and curly. Chapter 5. For some weeks Father Sergius had been living with one persistent thought: whether he was right in accepting the position in which he had not so much placed himself as been placed by the archimandrite and the abbot. That position had begun after the recovery of the 14-year-old boy. From that time, with each month, week, and day that passed, Sergius felt his own inner life wasting away and being replaced by external life. It was as if he had been turned inside out. Sergius saw that he was a means of attracting visitors and contributions to the monastery, and that therefore the authorities arranged matters in such a way as to make as much use of him as possible. For instance, they rendered it impossible for him to do any manual work. He was supplied with everything he could want, and they only demanded of him that he should not refuse his blessing to those who came to seek it. For his convenience they appointed days when he would receive. They arranged a reception room for men, and a place was railed in so that he should not be pushed over by the crowds of women visitors, and so that he could conveniently bless those who came. They told him that people needed him, and that, fulfilling Christ's law of love, he could not refuse their demand to see him, and that to avoid them would be cruel. He could not but agree with this, but the more he gave himself up to such a life, the more he felt that what was internal became external, and that the fount of living water within him dried up, and that what he did now was done more and more for men and less for God. Whether he admonished people, or simply blessed them, or prayed for the sick, or advised people about their lives, or listened to expressions of gratitude from those he had helped by precepts or alms or healing, as they assured him, he could not help being pleased at it, and could not be indifferent to the results of his activity and to the influence he exerted. He thought himself a shining light, and the more he felt this, the more was he conscious of a weakening, a dying down of the divine light of truth that shone within him. In how far is what I do for God, and in how far is it for men? That was the question that insistently tormented him, and to which he was not so much unable to give himself an answer as unable to face the answer. In the depth of his soul he felt that the devil had substituted an activity for men in place of his former activity for God. He felt this because, just as it had formerly been hard for him to be torn from his solitude, so now that solitude itself was hard for him. He was oppressed and wearied by visitors, but at the bottom of his heart he was glad of their presence, and glad of the praise they heaped upon him. There was a time when he decided to go away and hide. He even planned all that was necessary for that purpose. He prepared for himself a peasant's shirt, trousers, coat, and cap. He explained that he wanted these to give to those who asked, and he kept these clothes in his cell, planning how he would put them on, cut his hair short, and go away. First he would go some 300 versts by train. Then he would leave the train and walk from village to village. He asked an old man who had been a soldier how he tramped, what people gave him, and what shelter they allowed him. The soldier told him where people were most charitable, and where they would take a wanderer in for the night, and Father Sergius intended to avail himself of this information. He even put on those clothes one night in his desire to go, but he could not decide what was best, to remain or to escape. At first he was in doubt, but afterwards this indecision passed. He submitted to custom and yielded to the devil, and only the peasant garb reminded him of the thought and feeling he had had. Every day more and more people flocked to him, and less time was left him for prayer and for renewing his spiritual strength. Sometimes in lucid moments he thought he was like a place where there had once been a spring. There used to be a feeble spring of living water which flowed quietly from me and through me. This was true life, the time when she tempted me. He always thought with ecstasy of that night and of her who was now Mother Agnes. She had tasted of that pure water, but since then there had not been time for it to collect before thirsty people came crowding in and pushing one another aside, and they had trampled everything down and nothing was left but mud. So he thought in rare moments of lucidity, but his usual state of mind was one of weariness and a tender pity for himself because of that weariness. It was in spring, on the eve of the mid-Pentecostal feast. Father Sergius was officiating at the vigil service in his hermitage church, where the congregation was as large as the little church could hold, about 20 people. They were all well-to-do proprietors or merchants. Father Sergius admitted anyone, but a selection was made by the monk in attendance and by an assistant who was sent to the hermitage every day from the monastery. A crowd of some 80 people, pilgrims and peasants, and especially peasant women, stood outside waiting for Father Sergius to come out and bless them. Meanwhile he conducted the service. But at the point at which he went out to the tomb of his predecessor, he staggered and would have fallen had he not been caught by a merchant standing behind him, and by the monk acting as deacon. "What is the matter, Father Sergius?" "Dear man, O Lord!" exclaimed the women, "he is as white as a sheet." But Father Sergius recovered immediately, and though very pale, he waved the merchant and the deacon aside, and continued to chant the service. Father Seraphim, the deacon, the acolytes, and Sofia Ivanovna, a lady who always lived near the hermitage and tended Father Sergius, begged him to bring the service to an end. "No, there's nothing the matter," said Father Sergius, slightly smiling from beneath his moustache, and continuing the service. "Yes, that is the way the saints behave," thought he. "A holy man, an angel of God," he heard just then the voice of Sofia Ivanovna behind him, and also of the merchant who had supported him. He did not heed their entreaties, but went on with the service. Again crowding together, they all made their way by the narrow passages back into the little church, and there, though abbreviating it slightly, Father Sergius completed Vespers. Immediately after the service, Father Sergius, having pronounced the benediction on those present, went over to the bench under the elm tree at the entrance to the cave. He wished to rest and breathe the fresh air. He felt in need of it. But as soon as he left the church, the crowd of people rushed to him, soliciting his blessing, his advice, and his help. There were pilgrims who constantly tramped from one holy place to another, and from one starets to another, and were always entranced by every shrine and every starets. Father Sergius knew this common, cold, conventional, and most irreligious type. There were pilgrims, for the most part discharged soldiers, unaccustomed to a settled life, poverty-stricken, and many of them drunken old men, who tramped from monastery to monastery merely to be fed. And there were rough peasants and peasant women who had come with their selfish requirements, seeking cures or to have doubts about quite practical affairs solved for them, about marrying off a daughter, or hiring a shop, or buying a bit of land, or how to atone for having overlaid a child, or having an illegitimate one. All this was an old story, and not in the least interesting to him. He knew he would hear nothing new from these folk, that they would rouse no religious emotion in him. But he liked to see the crowd to which his blessing and advice was necessary and precious, so while that crowd oppressed him, it also pleased him. Father Seraphim began to drive them away, saying that Father Sergius was tired. But Father Sergius, remembering the words of the Gospel, "Forbid them, children, not to come unto me," and feeling tenderly towards himself at this recollection, said they should be allowed to approach. He rose, went to the railing beyond which the crowd had gathered, and began blessing them and answering their questions, but in a voice so weak that he was touched with pity for himself. Yet, despite his wish to receive them all, he could not do it. Things again grew dark before his eyes, and he staggered and grasped the railings. He felt a rush of blood to his head, and first went pale and then suddenly flushed. "I must leave the rest till tomorrow. I cannot do more today," and pronouncing a general benediction, he returned to the bench. The merchant again supported him, and leading him by the arm helped him to be seated. "Father," came voices from the crowd, "dear Father, do not forsake us. Without you we are lost." The merchant, having seated Father Sergius on the bench under the elm, took on himself police duties, and drove the people off very resolutely. It is true that he spoke in a low voice, so that Father Sergius might not hear him, but his words were incisive and angry. "Be off, be off! He has blessed you, and what more do you want? Get along with you, or I'll wring your necks. Move on there! Get along, you old woman, with your dirty leg bands! Go, go! Where are you shoving to? You've been told that it is finished. Tomorrow will be as God wills, but for today he has finished." "Father, only let my eyes have a glimpse of his dear face," said an old woman. "I'll glimpse you. Where are you shoving to?" Father Sergius noticed that the merchant seemed to be acting roughly, and in a feeble voice told the attendant that the people should not be driven away. He knew that they would be driven away all the same, and he much desired to be left alone and to rest, but he sent the attendant with that message to produce an impression. All right, I am not driving them away. I am only remonstrating with them," replied the merchant. "You know they wouldn't hesitate to drive a man to death. They have no pity, they only consider themselves. You've been told you cannot see him. Go away tomorrow." And he got rid of them all. He took all these pains because he liked order and liked to domineer and drive the people away, but chiefly because he wanted to have Father Sergius to himself. He was a widower with an only daughter, who was an invalid and unmarried, and whom he had brought 1,400 versts to Father Sergius to be healed. For 2 years past he had been taking her to different places to be cured. First to the university clinic in the chief town of the province, but that did no good. Then to a peasant in the province of Samara, where she got a little better. Then to a doctor in Moscow, to whom he paid much money, but this did no good at all. Now he had been told that Father Sergius wrought cures, and had brought her to him. So when all the people had been driven away, he approached Father Sergius, and suddenly falling on his knees loudly exclaimed, "Holy Father, bless my afflicted offspring, that she may be healed of her malady. I venture to prostrate myself at your holy feet." And he placed one hand on the other cupwise. He said and did all this as if he were doing something clearly and firmly appointed by law and usage, as if one must and should ask for a daughter to be cured in just this way and no other. He did it with such conviction that it seemed even to Father Sergius that it should be said and done in just that way, but nevertheless he bade him rise and tell him what the trouble was. The merchant said that his daughter, a girl of 22, had fallen ill 2 years ago after her mother's sudden death. She had moaned, as he expressed it, and since then had not been herself. And now he had brought her 1,400 versts, and she was waiting in the hostelry till Father Sergius should give orders to bring her. She did not go out during the day, being afraid of the light, and could only come after sunset. "Is she very weak?" asked Father Sergius. "No, she has no particular weakness. She is quite plump, and is only neurasthenic, the doctors say." "If you will only let me bring her this evening, Father Sergius, I'll fly like a spirit to fetch her. Holy Father, revive a parent's heart, restore his line, save his afflicted daughter by your prayers." And the merchant again threw himself on his knees, and bending sideways, with his head resting on his clenched fists, remained stock still. Father Sergius again told him to get up, and thinking how heavy his activities were, and how he went through with them patiently notwithstanding, he sighed heavily, and after a few seconds of silence said, "Well, bring her this evening. I'll pray for her, but now I am tired." And he closed his eyes. "I will send for you." The merchant went away, stepping on tiptoe, which only made his boots creak the louder, and Father Sergius remained alone. His whole life was filled by church services and by people who came to see him, but to-day had been a particularly difficult one. In the morning an important official had arrived, and had had a long conversation with him. After that a lady had come with her son. This son was a sceptical young professor, whom the mother, an ardent believer, and devoted to Father Sergius, had brought that he might talk to him. The conversation had been very trying. The young man, evidently not wishing to have a controversy with the monk, had agreed with him in everything as with someone who was mentally inferior. Father Sergius saw that the young man did not believe, but yet was satisfied, tranquil, and at ease, and the memory of that conversation now disquieted him. "Have something to eat, Father," said the attendant. "All right, bring me something." The attendant went to a hut that had been arranged some 10 paces from the cave, and Father Sergius remained alone. The time was long past when he had lived alone, doing everything for himself, and eating only rye bread or rolls prepared for the church. He had been advised long since that he had no right to neglect his health, and he was given wholesome though Lenten food. He ate sparingly, though much more than he had done, and often he ate with much pleasure, and not as formerly with aversion and a sense of guilt. So it was now. He had some gruel, drank a cup of tea, and ate half a white roll. The attendant went away, and Father Sergius remained alone under the elm tree. It was a wonderful May evening, when the birches, aspens, elms, wild cherries and oaks had just burst into foliage. The bush of wild cherries behind the elm tree was in full bloom, and had not yet begun to shed its blossoms, and the nightingales, one quite near at hand and 2 or 3 others in the bushes down by the river, burst into full song after some preliminary twitters. From the river came the far-off songs of peasants returning, no doubt, from their work. The sun was setting behind the forest, its last rays glowing through the leaves. All that side was brilliant green, the other side with the elm tree was dark. The cockchafers flew clumsily about, falling to the ground when they collided with anything. After supper Father Sergius began to repeat a silent prayer. "O Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy upon us." And then he read a psalm, and suddenly in the middle of the psalm a sparrow flew out from the bush, alighted on the ground, and hopped towards him, chirping as it came, but then it took flight at something and flew away. He said a prayer which referred to his abandonment of the world, and hastened to finish it in order to send for the merchant with a sick daughter. She interested him in that she presented a distraction, and because both she and her father considered him a saint whose prayers were efficacious. Outwardly he disavowed that idea, but in the depths of his soul he considered it to be true. He was often amazed that this had happened, that he, Stepan Kasatsky, had come to be such an extraordinary saint and even a worker of miracles, but of that fact there could not be the least doubt. He could not fail to believe in the miracles he himself witnessed, beginning with the sick boy and ending with the old woman who had recovered her sight when he had prayed for her. Strange as it might be, it was so. Accordingly, the merchant's daughter interested him as a new individual who had faith in him, and also as a fresh opportunity to confirm his healing powers and enhance his fame. They bring people 1,000 versts and write about it in the papers. The Emperor knows of it, and they know of it in Europe, in unbelieving Europe, thought he, and suddenly he felt ashamed of his vanity, and again began to pray. Lord, King of heaven, Comforter, Soul of truth, come and enter into me, and cleanse me from all sin, and save and bless my soul. Cleanse me from the sin of worldly vanity that troubles me, he repeated, and he remembered how often he had prayed about this, and how vain till now his prayers had been in that respect. His prayers worked miracles for others, but in his own case God had not granted him liberation from this petty passion. He remembered his prayers at the commencement of his life at the Hermitage, when he prayed for purity, humility, and love, and how it seemed to him then that God heard his prayers. He had retained his purity and had chopped off his finger, and he lifted the shriveled stump of that finger to his lips and kissed it. It seemed to him now that he had been humble then, when he had always seemed loathsome to himself on account of his sinfulness. And when he remembered the tender feelings with which he had then met an old man who was bringing a drunken soldier to him to ask alms, and how he had received her, it seemed to him that he had then possessed love also. But now? And he asked himself whether he loved anyone, whether he loved Sofya Ivanovna or Father Seraphim, whether he had any feelings of love for all who had come to him that day. for that learned young man with whom he had had that instructive discussion in which he was concerned only to show off his own intelligence, and that he had not lagged behind the times in knowledge. He wanted and needed their love, but felt none towards them. He now had neither love nor humanity nor purity. He was pleased to know that the merchant's daughter was 22, and he wondered whether she was good-looking. When he inquired whether she was weak, he really wanted to know if she had feminine charm. "Can I have fallen so low?" he thought. "Lord, help me, restore me, my Lord and God." And he clasped his hands and began to pray. The nightingales burst into song. A cockchafer knocked against him and crept up the back of his neck. He brushed it off. But does he exist? What if I am knocking at a door fastened from outside? The bar is on the door for all to see. Nature, the nightingales, and the cockchafers is that bar. Perhaps the young man was right. And he began to pray aloud. He prayed for a long time, till these thoughts vanished, and he again felt calm and confident. He rang the bell and told the attendant to say that the merchant might bring his daughter to him now. The merchant came, leading his daughter by the arm. He led her into the cell and immediately left her. She was a very fair girl, plump and very short, with a pale, frightened, childish face, and a much developed feminine figure. Father Sergius remained seated on the bench at the entrance, and when she was passing and stopped beside him for his blessing, he was aghast at himself for the way he looked at her figure. As she passed by him he was acutely conscious of her femininity, though he saw by her face that she was sensual and feeble-minded. He rose and went into the cell. She was sitting on a stool waiting for him, and when he entered she rose. "I want to go back to Papa," she said. "Don't be afraid," he replied. "What are you suffering from?" "I am in pain all over," she said, and suddenly her face lit up with a smile. "You will be well," said he. "Pray." "What is the use of praying? I have prayed and it does no good." And she continued to smile. "I want you to pray for me and lay your hands on me. I saw you in a dream." "How did you see me?" "I saw you put your hands on my breast like that." She took his hand and pressed it to her breast. "Just here." He yielded his right hand to her. "What is your name?" he asked, trembling all over and feeling that he was overcome and that his desire had already passed beyond control. "Marie." "Why?" She took his hand and kissed it, and then put her arm around his waist and pressed him to herself. "What are you doing?" he said. "Marie, you are a devil." "Oh, perhaps. What does it matter?" And embracing him, she sat down with him on the bed. At dawn he went out into the porch. Can this all have happened? Her father will come and she will tell him everything. She is a devil. What am I to do? Here is the axe with which I chopped off my finger. He snatched up the axe and moved back towards the cell. The attendant came up. "Do you want some wood chopped? Let me have the axe." Sergius yielded up the axe and entered the cell. She was lying there asleep. He looked at her with horror, and passed on beyond the partition, where he took down the peasant's clothes and put them on. Then he seized a pair of scissors, cut off his long hair, and went out along the path down the hill to the river, where he had not been for more than 3 years. A road ran beside the river, and he went along it and walked till noon. Then he went into a field of rye and lay down there. Towards evening he approached a village, but without entering it, it went towards the cliff that overhung the river. There he again lay down to rest. It was early morning, half an hour before sunrise. All was damp and gloomy, and a cold early wind was blowing from the west. Yes, I must end it all. There is no God. But how am I to end it? Throw myself in the river? I can swim and should not drown. Hang myself? Yes, just throw this sash over a branch. This seemed so feasible and so easy that he felt horrified. As usual at moments of despair, he felt the need of prayer. But there was no one to pray to. There was no God. He lay down resting on his arm, and suddenly such a longing for sleep overcame him that he could no longer support his head on his hand, but stretched out his arm, laid his head upon it, and fell asleep. But that sleep lasted only for a moment. He woke up immediately and began not to dream but to remember. He saw himself as a child in his mother's home in the country. A carriage drives up, and out of it steps Uncle Nicholas Sergievitch, with his long spade-shaped black beard, and with him Pashenka, a thin little girl with large mild eyes and a timid, pathetic face. And into their company of boys Pashenka is brought, and they have to play with her. But it is dull. She is silly, and it ends by their making fun of her and forcing her to show how she can swim. She lies down on the floor and shows them, and they all laugh and make a fool of her. She sees this and blushes red in patches and becomes more pitiable than before, so pitiable that he feels ashamed and can never forget that crooked, kindly, submissive smile. And Sergius remembers having seen her since then. Long after, just before he became a monk, she had married a landowner who squandered all her fortune and was in the habit of beating her. She had had 2 children, a son and a daughter, but the son had died while still young. And Sergius remembered having seen her very wretched. Then again he had seen her in the monastery when she was a widow. She had been still the same, not exactly stupid, but insipid, insignificant, and pitiable. She had come with her daughter and her daughter's fiancé. They were already poor at that time, and later on he had heard that she was living in a small provincial town and was very poor. "Why am I thinking about her?" he asked himself, but he could not cease doing so. "Where is she? How is she getting on? Is she still as unhappy as she was then, when she had to show us how to swim on the floor? But why should I think about her? What am I doing? I must put an end to myself." And again he felt afraid, and again, to escape from that thought, he went on thinking about Pashenka. So he lay for a long time, thinking now of this unavoidable end, and now of Pashenka. She presented herself to him as a means of salvation. At last he fell asleep, and in his sleep he saw an angel who came to him and said, "Go to Pashenka and learn from her what you have to do, what your sin is, and wherein lies your salvation." He awoke, and having decided that this was a vision sent by God, he felt glad, and resolved to do what had been told him in the vision. He knew the town where she lived. It was some 300 versts, 200 miles, away, and he set out to walk there. Chapter 6. Pashenka had already long ceased to be Pashenka, and had become old, withered, wrinkled Praskovya Mikhailovna, mother-in-law of that failure, the drunken official Mavrikevyi. She was living in the country town where he had had his last appointment, and there she was supporting the family. Her daughter, her ailing, neurasthenic son-in-law, and her 5 grandchildren. She did this by giving music lessons to tradesmen's daughters, giving 4 and sometimes 5 lessons a day of an hour each, and earning in this way some 60 roubles (£6) a month. So they lived for the present, in expectation of another appointment. She had sent letters to all her relations and acquaintances, asking them to obtain a post for her son-in-law, and among the rest she had written to Sergius, but that letter had not reached him. It was Saturday, and Praskovya Mikhailovna was herself mixing dough for currant bread, such as the serf cook on her father's estate used to make so well. She wished to give her grandchildren a treat on the Sunday. Masha, her daughter, was nursing her youngest child, the eldest boy and girl were at school, and her son-in-law was asleep, not having slept during the night. Praskovya Mikhailovna had remained awake too for a great part of the night, trying to soften her daughter's anger against her husband. She saw that it was impossible for her son-in-law, a weak creature, to be other than he was, and realized that his wife's reproaches could do no good. So she used all her efforts to soften those reproaches and to avoid recrimination and anger. Unkindly relations between people caused her actual physical suffering. It was so clear to her that bitter feelings do not make anything better, but only make everything worse. She did not in fact think about this, she simply suffered at the sight of anger as she would from a bad smell, a harsh noise, or from blows on her body. She had, with a feeling of self-satisfaction, just taught Lukerya how to mix the dough, when her 6-year-old grandson Misha, wearing an apron and with darned stockings on his crooked little legs, ran into the kitchen with a frightened face. "Grandma, a dreadful old man wants to see you." Lukerya looked out at the door. "There is a pilgrim of some kind, a man." Praskovya Mikhailovna rubbed her thin elbows against one another, wiped her hands on her apron, and went upstairs to get a 5-kopeck piece, about a penny, out of her purse for him. But remembering that she had nothing less than a 10-kopeck piece, she decided to give him some bread instead. She returned to the cupboard, but suddenly blushed at the thought of having grudged the 10-kopeck piece, and telling Lukerya to cut a slice of bread, went upstairs again to fetch it. "It serves you right," she said to herself. "You must now give twice over." She gave both the bread and the money to the pilgrim, and when doing so, far from being proud of her generosity, she excused herself for giving so little. The man had such an imposing appearance. Though he had tramped 200 versts as a beggar, though he was tattered and had grown thin and weather-beaten, though he had cropped his long hair and was wearing a peasant's cap and boots, and though he bowed very humbly, Sergius still had the impressive appearance that made him so attractive. But Praskovya Mikhailovna did not recognize him. She could hardly do so, not having seen him for almost 20 years. "Don't think ill of me, father. Perhaps you want something to eat." He took the bread and the money, and Praskovya Mikhailovna was surprised that he did not go, but stood looking at her. "Pashenka, I have come to you. Take me in." His beautiful black eyes, shining with the tears that started in them, were fixed on her with imploring insistence, and under his greyish moustache his lips quivered piteously. Praskovya Mikhailovna pressed her hands to her withered breast, opened her mouth, and stood petrified, staring at the pilgrim with dilated eyes. "It can't be! Stepa! Sergey! Father Sergius!" "Yes, it is I," said Sergius in a low voice. "Only not Sergius or Father Sergius, but a great sinner, Stepan Kasatsky, a great and lost sinner. Take me in and help me." "It's impossible. How have you so humbled yourself? But come in." She reached out her hand, but he did not take it and only followed her in. But where was she to take him? The lodging was a small one. Formerly she had had a tiny room, almost a closet, for herself, but later she had given it up to her daughter, and Masha was now sitting there rocking the baby. "Sit here for the present," she said to Sergius, pointing to a bench in the kitchen. He sat down at once, and with an evidently accustomed movement slipped the straps of his wallet first off one shoulder and then off the other. My God, how have you humbled yourself, father? Such great fame, and now like this." Sergius did not reply, but only smiled meekly, placing his wallet under the bench on which he sat. "Masha, do you know who this is?" And with a whisper, Praskovya Mikhailovna told her daughter who he was, and together they then carried the bed and the cradle out of the tiny room and cleared it for Sergius. Praskovya Mikhailovna led him into it. "Here you can rest. Don't take offence, but I must go out." "Where to?" "I have to go to a lesson. I am ashamed to tell you, but I teach music." "Music? But that is good." "Only just one thing, Praskovya Mikhailovna. I have come to you with a definite object. When can I talk with you?" "I shall be very glad. Will this evening do?" "Yes, but one thing more. Don't speak about me, or say who I am. I have revealed myself only to you. No one knows where I have gone to. It must be so. Oh, but I have told my daughter. Well, ask her not to mention it." And Sergius took off his boots, lay down, and at once fell asleep after a sleepless night and a walk of nearly 30 miles. When Praskovya Mikhailovna returned, Sergius was sitting in the little room waiting for her. He did not come out for dinner, but had some soup and gruel which Lukerya brought him. "How is it that you have come back earlier than you said?" asked Sergius. "Can I speak to you now? How is it that I have the happiness to receive such a guest?" "I have missed one of my lessons. That can wait. I had always been planning to go to see you. I wrote to you, and now this good fortune has come." "Pashenka, please listen to what I am going to tell you as to a confession made to God at my last hour, Pashenka. I am not a holy man. I am not even as good as a simple ordinary man. I am a loathsome, vile and proud sinner who has gone astray, and who, if not worse than everyone else, is at least worse than most very bad people." Pashenka looked at him at first with staring eyes, but she believed what he said, and when she had quite grasped it, she touched his hands, smiling pityingly, and said, "Perhaps you exaggerate, Stiva?" "No, Pashenka, I am an adulterer, a murderer, a blasphemer, and a deceiver." "My God, how is that?" exclaimed Praskovya Mikhailovna. "But I must go on living. And I, who thought I knew everything, who taught others how to live, I know nothing and ask you to teach me." "What are you saying, Stiva? You are laughing at me. Why do you always make fun of me?" "Well, if you think I am jesting, you must have it as you please. But tell me all the same how you live and how you have lived your life." "I? I have lived a very nasty, horrible life, and now God is punishing me as I deserve. I live so wretchedly, so wretchedly." "How was it with your marriage? How did you live with your husband?" "It was all bad. I married because I fell in love in the nastiest way. Papa did not approve, but I would not listen to anything, and just got married. Then, instead of helping my husband, I tormented him by my jealousy, which I could not restrain." "I heard that he drank." "Yes, but I did not give him any peace. I always reproached him, though you know it is a disease. He could not refrain from it. I now remembered how I tried to prevent his having it, and the frightful scenes we had." And she looked at Kasatsky with beautiful eyes, suffering from the remembrance. Kasatsky remembered how he had been told that Pashenka's husband used to beat her, and now, looking at her thin, withered neck, with prominent veins behind her ears, and her scanty coil of hair, half grey, half auburn, he seemed to see just how it had occurred. "Then I was left with 2 children and no means at all." "But you have an estate." "Oh, we sold that while Vasya was still alive, and the money was all spent. We had to live, and like all our young ladies I did not know how to earn anything. I was particularly useless and helpless, so we spent all we had. I taught the children and improved my own education a little, and then Mitya fell ill when he was already in the 4th form, and God took him. Masha fell in love with Vanya, my son-in-law, and, well, he is well-meaning but unfortunate. He is ill." "Mamma," her daughter's voice interrupted her, "take Mitya. I can't be in 2 places at once." Praskovya Mikhailovna shuddered, but rose and went out of the room, stepping quickly in her patched shoes. She soon came back with a boy of 2 in her arms, who threw himself backwards and grabbed at her shawl with his little hands. "Where was I? Oh yes, he had a good appointment here, and his chief was a kind man too, but Vanya could not go on, and had to give up his position." "What is the matter with him?" "Neurasthenia. It is a dreadful complaint. We consulted a doctor who told us he ought to go away, but we had no means. I always hope it will pass of itself. He has no particular pain, but—" "Lukerya!" cried an angry and feeble voice. "She is always sent away when I want her. Mamma!" "I'm coming," Praskovya Mikhailovna again interrupted herself. "He has not had his dinner yet. He can't eat with us." She went out and arranged something, and came back wiping her thin dark hands. "So that is how I live. I always complain and am always dissatisfied, but thank God the grandchildren are all nice and healthy, and we can still live. But why talk about me? But what do you live on?" "Well, I earn a little. How I used to dislike music, but how useful it is to me now." Her small hand lay on the chest of drawers beside which she was sitting, and she drummed an exercise with her thin fingers. "How much do you get for a lesson?" "Sometimes a rouble, sometimes 50 kopecks, or sometimes 30. They are all so kind to me." "And do your pupils get on well?" asked Kasatsky with a slight smile. Praskovya Mikhailovna did not at first believe that he was asking seriously, and looked inquiringly into his eyes. "Some of them do. One of them is a splendid girl, the butcher's daughter. Such a good, kind girl. If I were a clever woman I ought, of course, with the connection papa had, to be able to get an appointment for my son-in-law. But as it is I have not been able to do anything, and have brought them all to this, as you see." "Yes, yes," said Kasatsky, lowering his head. "And how is it, Pashenka? Do you take part in church life?" "Oh, don't speak of it. I am so bad that way, and have neglected it so. I keep the fasts with my children and sometimes go to church, and then again sometimes I don't go for months. I only send the children." "But why don't you go yourself?" "To tell the truth," she blushed, "I am ashamed, for my daughter's sake and the children's, to go there in tattered clothes, and I haven't anything else. Besides, I am just lazy." "And do you pray at home?" "I do. But what sort of prayer is it?" "Only mechanical. I know it should not be like that, but I lack real religious feeling. The only thing is that I know how bad I am." "Yes, yes, that's right," said Kasatsky, as if approvingly. I'm coming," she replied to a call from her son-in-law, and tidying her scanty plate she left the room. But this time it was long before she returned. When she came back Kasatsky was sitting in the same position, his elbows resting on his knees and his head bowed, but his wallet was strapped on his back. When she came in carrying a small tin lamp without a shade, he raised his fine weary eyes and sighed very deeply. "I did not tell them who you are," she began timidly. "I only said that you are a pilgrim, a nobleman, and that I used to know you. Come into the dining room for tea." "No." "Well then, I'll bring some to you here." "No, I don't want anything. God bless you, Pashenka. I am going now. If you pity me, don't tell anyone that you have seen me. For the love of God, don't tell anyone." "Thank you. I would bow to your feet, but I know it would make you feel awkward. Thank you, and forgive me for Christ's sake." "Give me your blessing. God bless you. Forgive me for Christ's sake." He rose, but she would not let him go until she had given him bread and butter and rusks. He took it all and went away. It was dark, and before he had passed the second house he was lost to sight. She only knew he was there because the dog at the priest's house was barking. "So that is what my dream meant. Pashenka is what I ought to have been, but failed to be. I lived for men on the pretext of living for God, while she lived for God, imagining that she lives for men. Yes, one good deed, a cup of water given without thought of reward, is worth more than any benefit I imagined I was bestowing on people. But after all, was there not some share of sincere desire to serve God, he asked himself, and the answer was yes, there was, but it was all soiled and overgrown by desire for human praise. Yes, there is no God for the man who lives as I did, for human praise. I will now seek Him. And he walked from village to village as he had done on his way to Pashenka, meeting and parting from other pilgrims, men and women, and asking for bread and a night's rest in Christ's name. Occasionally some angry housewife scolded him, or a drunken peasant reviled him, but for the most part he was given food and drink, and even something to take with him. His noble bearing disposed some people in his favour, while others on the contrary seemed pleased at the sight of a gentleman who had come to beggary. But his gentleness prevailed with every one. Often, finding a copy of the Gospels in a hut, he would read it aloud. And when they heard him, the people were always touched and surprised, as at something new yet familiar. When he succeeded in helping people, either by advice, or by his knowledge of reading and writing, or by settling some quarrel, he did not wait to see their gratitude, but went away directly afterwards. And little by little God began to reveal himself within him. Once he was walking along with 2 old women and a soldier. They were stopped by a party consisting of a lady and gentleman in a gig, and another lady and gentleman on horseback. The husband was on horseback with his daughter, while in the gig his wife was driving with a Frenchman, evidently a traveller. The party stopped to let the Frenchman see the pilgrims, who, in accord with a popular Russian superstition, tramped about from place to place instead of working. They spoke French, thinking that the others would not understand them. "Demandez-leur," said the Frenchman, "s'ils sont bien sûrs que leur pèlerinage est agréable à Dieu." The question was asked, and one old woman replied, "As God takes it, our feet have reached the holy places, but our hearts may not have done so." They asked the soldier. He said that he was alone in the world and had nowhere else to go. They asked Kasatsky who he was. "The servant of God." "Qu'est-ce que c'est qu'il dit?" "Il ne répond pas." "Il dit qu'il est un serviteur de Dieu. Cela doit être une fille de prêtre. Il a de la race. Avez-vous de la petite monnaie?" A Frenchman found some small change and gave 20 kopecks to each of the pilgrims. "Mais dites-leur que ce n'est pas pour les Sergius que je leur donne, mais pour qu'ils se régalent d'été. Kai, chai, pourvu mon vieux," he said with a smile, and he patted Kasatsky on the shoulder with his gloved hand. "May Christ bless you," replied Kasatsky, without replacing his cap and bowing his bald head. He rejoiced particularly at this meeting, because he had disregarded the opinion of men, and had done the simplest, easiest thing, humbly accepted 20 kopecks and given them to his comrade, a blind beggar. The less importance he attached to the opinion of men, the more did he feel the presence of God within him. For 8 months Kasatsky tramped on in this manner, and in the 9th month he was arrested for not having a passport. This happened at a night refuge in a provincial town where he had passed the night with some pilgrims. He was taken to the police station, and when asked who he was and where was his passport, he replied that he had no passport and that he was a servant of God. He was classed as a tramp, sentenced and sent to live in Siberia. In Siberia he has settled down as the hired man of a well-to-do peasant, in which capacity he works in the kitchen garden, teaches children, and attends to the sick. End of section 2. Recording by James Carson. End of Father Sergius by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise and Aylmer Maude.